My name is Caleb Marsh. I am 35 years old. And the night my brother drove away and left me bleeding on a wet road, he had no idea the hospital he was heading to was the same one where the staff called me Dr. Marsh. He thought I was the family embarrassment. He thought I was the brother who hadn't amounted to much, who worked long hours for average pay, who showed up to Christmas with no girlfriend and no impressive title to offer at the table when the conversation turned to careers. He had 3 years of that story invested in me, and he had shared it with everyone who stood still long enough to listen. What he didn't know was going to find him in a waiting room. The accident happened on Route 7, a two-lane stretch of road that runs along the ridge above Clearwater Valley in early October, when the leaves are still deciding whether to fall and the rain comes sideways without warning. We had been driving separately from a family dinner at my parents' house, 22 miles of dark highway between us and home, and my car hit standing water on a curve at 40 miles an hour and left the road. I remember the steering wheel. I remember the sound the guardrail made. I remember the windshield becoming a white map of cracks, and then I remember nothing for a period of time I still cannot account for. When I came back, Owen was standing outside my window. I tried to say his name. What came out was close enough that he heard it. He looked at me. He looked at the road. He looked at something in my car that I couldn't see from where my head was resting against the door. Then he walked back to his vehicle. I heard his engine. I heard his tires on the wet asphalt. I heard the sound of a car moving away from where I was. Before I tell you what happened when he walked into that hospital waiting room, and what the next 48 hours looked like for everyone who had believed the story he was telling about me, let me ask you something. Where are you right now, and what is the weather like outside your window? Because the night this happened, the rain didn't stop for 6 hours. And by the time it did, everything had changed. Stay with me. Owen is 2 years older than me. He is the kind of man who fills a room in the way that certain people do, not through warmth or humor, but through a kind of physical confidence that reads as authority to people who haven't spent enough time around him to see what's underneath it. He is good-looking in a corporate way, broad-shouldered, always wearing the right thing for the occasion, always ready with the handshake that lands a half-second before you expect it. He works in commercial real estate development, which suits him because it is an industry that rewards the appearance of certainty over the possession of it. He has the right car, the right neighborhood, the right friends who talk about the right things at dinner parties where the food is secondary to the positioning. Our father respected him in the uncomplicated way that fathers sometimes respect sons who remind them of themselves. Our mother loved him in the way that mothers love the child who makes public life easier, the one who presents well at graduations and weddings, and the kind of events where other people's children get compared. I was not that child. I was the one who studied. Not in the visible way, not the way that produces debate trophies and student council victories, and the kind of academic record that gets framed and hung in a hallway. I studied in the quiet way, the kind that doesn't show up anywhere useful until it does, suddenly and completely, in a way no one saw coming because they had spent years looking in a different direction. I started medical school at 23. I finished my general surgery residency at 31. I completed a vascular surgery fellowship at 33 and accepted an attending position at Clearwater Regional Medical Center, which is the largest trauma-capable hospital in the valley and the place where, on a wet October night, my brother would walk into the waiting room and ask someone what was happening. During those years, I did not announce myself. This is important to understand. It was not a strategy. It was not a long game played with an exit in mind. It was simply that I had been trained in an environment where what you knew mattered more than what you said about what you knew, and I had carried that habit back into my personal life without fully noticing I'd done it. My family knew I worked in medicine. My mother knew I had gone through residency because she had sent care packages during the first 2 years that I had eaten gratefully and never adequately thanked her for. My father knew in the general way that fathers know things they haven't paid close attention to, which is to say he knew the category without knowing the contents. Owen knew I was a doctor in the same way he knew the capital of Portugal. He had the word. He had no idea what was inside it. What Owen knew with much greater clarity was the version of me that existed before the version I had become. The younger brother who had spent 4 years in college, changing his major twice. The kid who had driven a 12-year-old Honda with a cracked bumper. The one who never quite had enough money for the family vacations that required deposits in advance. The one who showed up at Christmas looking tired and ate too much and didn't talk about his work because his work was consuming him in ways he couldn't explain at a dinner table without sounding either dramatic or self-important. He had assembled this evidence into a picture. The picture said, "Caleb is fine, but not quite. Caleb is doing his thing, but his thing is probably not much. Caleb seems okay, but you wouldn't point to him if someone asked who in the family had really made it." He told this picture to people. I know this because Aunt Renata told me at a birthday party for my cousin the previous spring, in the offhand way that people mention things they assume you already know. She said, "Owen said you're working at a clinic down by the hospital. He said it keeps you busy." She said it with the specific gentle sympathy of someone passing along information about a person who is quietly struggling. I worked at the hospital. I held a surgical scalpel inside people's arteries and repaired the structures that kept their blood moving through their bodies. I was not working at a clinic down by the hospital. I was working at the hospital, inside human beings, with a team of residents who called me Dr. Marsh and who came to me when they were uncertain because I was the person in the room who was supposed to know. I told Aunt Renata I was doing well. She patted my arm. I did not correct the clinic thing. That was, in retrospect, a choice that had consequences. The family dinner had been my mother's idea and my father's execution. He had a way of organizing events that felt less like invitations and more like scheduling notices, where the time and place were given, but attendance was understood to be non-negotiable. He had recently recovered from a procedure on his knee and wanted both his sons under one roof for a meal that he described, on the phone, as just family. Just family in our household meant the 5 of us, my parents, Owen, his wife Paige, and me, around a table in the house I grew up in, eating food my mother had been preparing since Tuesday, while my father conducted the dinner like a moderately interested chair of a committee meeting. I had come directly from the hospital. That was a fact no one acknowledged because no one thought to ask. And I didn't mention it because mentioning it would have required a level of explanation that I didn't have the energy for on a Wednesday evening after 12 hours of work. I had changed in the locker room before leaving, which meant I arrived in civilian clothes with my hospital bag over my shoulder, which contained the badge and the pager and the small notebook I kept for patient notes, and the 2 granola bars I had eaten instead of lunch. The kitchen smelled like the pot roast my mother made for significant occasions, which told me she had been planning this dinner longer than she let on, and the dining room table had the good placemats, which confirmed it. These were the coded signals of a household where preparation was love and love was demonstrated through detail, and I received them with the gratitude I always felt for the way my mother marked occasions, even when the people at the table didn't fully understand they were being marked. Paige was pleasant in the way that people are pleasant when they have made a decision about you, and the decision is benign but final. She had been married to Owen for 4 years. She asked me twice during dinner what I was up to these days, which told me she had not retained whatever Owen had told her about my work, which told me what Owen had said about it wasn't memorable enough to stick. The first time I gave her a brief answer, and she nodded and moved on. The second time, which came during the main course and felt more like a genuine attempt at conversation than a formality, I said I'd been in the OR that morning and had a follow-up in the afternoon. She said, "Oh, interesting," in a tone that suggested she was unsure what to do with the information, and the conversation shifted to the school district her son was going to attend in the fall. Owen talked about a development deal he was working on in the south end of the city. He talked about it with the authority of someone describing a war he was winning. He used words like leverage and exposure and horizon, and upside with the fluency of a man who had practiced them long enough that they no longer felt like vocabulary, just speech. My father asked follow-up questions with genuine interest, Real estate was the kind of industry my father understood, with outcomes you could point to, with structures that stayed standing after they were built. My mother refilled his water glass twice, which was her way of signaling approval. At one point, my father turned to me, somewhere in the middle of the entree, and asked how things were going at work. I said they were busy. He nodded the way people nod when the answer is acceptable but not interesting. Owen said, without looking up from his plate, "Caleb's always been good at busy." He said it as a compliment in tone and a reduction in content, which was a skill he had refined over years of not quite meaning to be unkind. I thought about the morning. About the patient who had been brought in at 6:45 with a failing arterial graft from a repair done 18 months ago at another facility, and the 3 hours I had spent in the operating room correcting it while a resident stood beside me learning what correction looked like under pressure. I thought about the afternoon follow-up, a woman named Dolores who had come in for imaging and left with better news than she'd arrived expecting, and the particular quality of her face when I told her. I thought about saying any of this at the dinner table. I ate my pot roast and asked my mother how the garden was doing. After dinner, my father and I talked for a while on the back porch while Owen and Paige helped my mother with dishes. The porch looked out over the yard that had been the same yard for 30 years, the oak tree that was 3 feet taller than the last time I had climbed it, the flower bed my mother tended with the focused patience she applied to everything she cared about, the fence that my father had replaced 2 summers ago and was quietly proud of. My father asked whether I was taking care of myself. I said yes. He asked whether I was sleeping enough. I said probably not. He laughed a little, the comfortable laugh of a man whose son's weariness is familiar enough to have become a kind of personality trait. What he didn't ask, what he had never asked, in 12 years of medical training and 2 years of practice, was what I actually did during those hours I wasn't sleeping. What room I was in. What I was working on, what it looked like from the inside. I didn't offer it. He didn't ask. We stood on the porch in the companionable distance that had been our version of closeness since I was old enough to stop needing him to carry me anywhere. I left at 9:30. Owen and Paige left shortly after. The rain had started around 8:30 and had settled into the steady, purposeful kind that doesn't announce itself or apologize. Route 7 is not a road that benefits from rain. It is narrow in places and cambered in a way that channels water toward the inside shoulder. And there is a curve at the 11-mile mark, past the old Breckenridge property, where the road dips before rising again and water pools in the depression when the drainage is overwhelmed. I had driven that curve 400 times in 12 years. On the 401st time, I hit the pool at the wrong angle and at the wrong speed, and my car did what physics requires when traction disappears beneath a moving vehicle. It went sideways, then it went into the guardrail. Then it stopped. The impact was not cinematic. There was no slow motion. There was the sudden compression of everything, the airbag, the noise, the smell of deployed chemicals, and then the stillness that follows violent events when the body hasn't yet decided what to report. I was conscious. I took inventory. My left arm hurt in a way that suggested something structural. My head had struck the side window, and the area above my left temple was wet in a way that wasn't rain. My sternum was reporting from the airbag contact. My right leg was uncomfortable but responsive. I could breathe. I reached for my phone. My hands weren't cooperating yet. The fine motor control that surgery requires took a moment to come back online after the shock, and while I was working on that, I heard a car stop on the shoulder behind me. I heard a door. I heard footsteps on wet asphalt. Owen's face appeared at my window. The rain was hitting his jacket and running off the shoulders, and his expression was very specific, the expression of a man who has encountered something unexpected and is calculating the cost of involvement. Caleb, his voice was even, not panicked, measured. Owen, mine wasn't as clean. My jaw felt strange and the word came out shaped wrong. He looked at my arm, then at my head. Then, briefly, at something on the passenger seat. My badge, the one that said Clearwater Regional Medical Center, with my photograph and the words attending physician, vascular surgery beneath my name. It was clipped to the bag I took to work, which I'd brought with me to my parents' house because I'd been on call through the morning and had come directly from the hospital. I saw him see it. His eyes came back to my face. "Is anyone else coming?" I asked. "Meaning, did you call anyone? Did you call an ambulance? Is help on the way?" He said, "I need to make some calls." He stepped back from the window. He reached into his jacket and took out his phone. I assumed he was calling emergency services. I was working on my own phone with my right hand, trying to get the screen to respond, and my vision was doing something I recognized as a symptom of the head impact and didn't like the implications of, so I was managing several things at once and not managing any of them well. I did not hear him dial. I did not hear him speak. What I heard, after a period of time I cannot accurately estimate, was his engine. I turned my head toward the sound, which cost me more effort than it should have, and I saw his taillights through the rain and the cracked glass, getting smaller. He left. I know now, from the phone records that came out later, that Owen made 2 calls in the 11 minutes between stopping behind me and driving away. The first was to my parents' house. He told my mother there had been an accident, that I seemed okay, and that he was heading to the hospital to make sure everything was handled. He did not say he had left me. He did not say he had not called an ambulance. He presented the situation as already being in process, with himself as an active part of managing it. The second call was to Paige, who had driven separately and was already home. He told her the same version. Neither call contained the number 911. A truck driver named Marcus Webb found me 23 minutes later. He was southbound on Route 7 and saw my hazard lights still running, which I apparently had the presence of mind to activate at some point I don't remember. And he pulled over and assessed the situation in the calm, practical way of a man who has spent decades on highways and knows the difference between a vehicle that needs a push and a person who needs a hospital. He called 911. He stayed on the line. He stayed with me. His name is the one I want you to remember from this story, because I never got to properly tell him what it meant that he didn't drive away. I was brought into Clearwater Regional's trauma bay at 10:47 p.m. I was conscious by then, intermittently. The EMTs had given me their assessments in the efficient shorthand of people who transfer critical information under pressure without wasting syllables. And I had received the information in the way that medical professionals receive bad news about themselves, with the particular dissociation of a person trying to be a clinician about their own body, which is not actually possible, but is nevertheless the only available coping mechanism. Left ulnar fracture. Laceration above the left temple, likely requiring sutures. Possible mild traumatic brain injury pending imaging. Sternal contusion. No obvious spinal injury. The lead EMT, a young woman I didn't recognize, was professional and thorough and had clearly managed patients who tried to give her clinical opinions about their own care before. Because when I started to describe the texture of the head pain, she said, gently but without apology, "I know. We've got it." Which was the right response. I remember the automatic doors of the trauma bay opening. I remember the ceiling lights of Clearwater Regional going overhead in the sequence I knew from 100 other arrivals, where I had been the person standing rather than the person lying down. There is a particular disorientation to seeing a ceiling you have always seen from a vertical position from a horizontal one. The same lights, the same tiles, the same spatial relationship between the fixtures and the walls, just all of it from below, which reorders everything slightly. And then I heard a voice I recognized. Marsh. Jesus, is that Marsh? Dr. Priya Anand. My colleague of 3 years, attending emergency physician, second to none at maintaining professional composure under pressure, and currently staring at me from above with an expression that told me everything about how I looked. Hey, Priya. Do not talk to me like we're in the break room right now, she said, already moving, hands already working. The professional override engaged the way it always engaged when the situation required it. What happened? Car accident on Route 7. Head strike. Left temple, window. She looked at the laceration with the specific attention of an emergency physician looking at a laceration, which is different from the attention most people give to an injury. It is the attention of categorization. What this is, what it needs, how urgently. Have you lost consciousness? Briefly, I'm not sure how long. Who was with you when EMS arrived? No one, a truck driver found me. She looked at me for a half-second longer than the clinical assessment required. Then, she moved on. She said something to a resident I couldn't see. The resident moved fast. A nurse appeared on my left and began attaching monitoring leads with the quiet efficiency of someone whose hands knew this sequence without requiring the brain to narrate it. Priya's voice shifted to the register she used when she was running a trauma bay, which was lower and cleaner and left no room for interpretation. I was, at this point, deeply grateful for the environment I had chosen to work in. Not because I received special treatment. I didn't and wouldn't have wanted it. But because the people around me were extremely good at their jobs and knew how to receive information I was giving them about my own condition without either dismissing it, because I was a patient or overcrediting it, because I had a medical degree. Priya treated me like a patient and consulted me like a colleague and managed to do both simultaneously, which is a skill I had always admired in her and was now experiencing from the receiving end with considerably more appreciation than I had previously had for it. I needed 6 sutures above my temple. My ulna required imaging and specialist consultation, which meant I was going to be consulting with one of the orthopedic attendings I saw in the cafeteria every Tuesday and Thursday, which was strange to contemplate from the position of the person who needed the consultation. The TBI workup came back as mild, which was the best outcome from the available range, but which meant I was not going home and was not going to be in the operating room in the morning. That last part was what I was thinking about when Priya came back with a look I recognized as information she was deciding how to deliver. "There's someone in the waiting room," she said. "Claims to be your brother. He's been here for about 20 minutes. I looked at the ceiling. "He says there was an accident and he came to make sure you were taken care of." "He wasn't there when the ambulance arrived," I said. Priya's face did something controlled and precise. Not surprise. She was not easily surprised. Something more like a recalibration, a quiet interior adjustment to a situation that had just become more complicated than it appeared. "I see." "He left." A pause. The specific kind that contains a response being considered and set aside in favor of a more useful one. "Your parents are also on their way," she said. "They got a call." "From Owen." "Presumably." She looked at the sutures. "Your dad called the main line when he couldn't get you on your phone. Desk staff recognized your name and patched him through to me." That detail, that my father had called the hospital and the desk staff had recognized my name and routed the call to my colleague, was one I absorbed without responding to. It would have required Owen, standing at whatever point he had stood at in the previous 20 minutes, to understand what it meant. That this was not a building where I was a stranger. That this was not a facility where I was a patient who had arrived from somewhere outside its world. That this was, in every professional sense, my building. "Priya," I said. "Yeah." "Who's the attending for the ortho consult?" "She told me. Can you tell her it's me when you call?" "I already did," she said. "She's coming down." "And Priya." "Still here." "Don't send anyone out to the waiting room yet." She looked at me, understanding the implication without needing it explained, which was one of the things that made her excellent at her job. She nodded once and went. The orthopedic consultant was Dr. Sandra Fong, who had been 3 years ahead of me in the hospital system and had the kind of clinical record that made other surgeons speak about her in the particular tone reserved for people who are genuinely exceptional at the technical parts of the work. She came in, looked at the imaging, examined my arm with the hands of someone who had spent 15 years knowing exactly what she was feeling for, and told me the fracture was clean and displaced and was going to need surgical repair. I said I had suspected as much. She said, You're going to be a terrible patient. I said, probably. She smiled and went to arrange the OR. By the time my parents arrived, I was in a room on the 4th floor with my arm elevated and a mild headache that the nurses were managing with appropriate suspicion given the TBI workup. My mother came through the door first and crossed the room in the way mothers cross rooms when their children are injured, which is to say quickly, and without any of the measured caution she applied to most other situations in life. She held my right hand. My father stood at the foot of the bed and looked at me with the particular expression of a man taking inventory of damage and calculating his feelings about it. Not cold, just methodical. He asked what had happened. I told him, in the concise way I told things when I was managing my own energy. He asked where Owen was. I said, he came here, he should be in the waiting room. My father nodded and moved to go find him. My mother stayed. After he left, she looked at me carefully, not the way she looked at my arm or my head, the way she looked at my face. Caleb. Mom, were you alone when the ambulance came? She already knew. That was the thing about my mother. She had the specific intelligence of a woman who had spent 40 years interpreting incomplete information from the people she loved and had become extremely accurate at filling in the gaps. Yes, I said. She let go of my hand and placed it carefully on the blanket, like she was setting something down that needed to be set down before she did anything else. He said he was coordinating, she said quietly. I know. She didn't say anything else for a moment. The room had the particular nighttime quiet of a hospital floor, the distant beeping, the soft movement of nurses, the sound of the building doing its work around the people it contained. What do you need? She asked. Nothing right now, surgery in the morning. I'll be here. You don't have to. I'll be here, she said again, in the tone that closed the subject. Owen came to my room at 11:40. He had been in the waiting room for nearly an hour by then, and whatever story he had been maintaining in that time had apparently required effort, because when he appeared in my doorway, he had the look of a man who had been running a complicated calculation and was not sure the math had worked out. My mother was still in the chair beside the bed. She stood when he came in. Owen looked at her, then at me. Caleb, he said it the way he had said it on the road, measured and even, the tone of a man managing a situation rather than feeling one. Owen. He came into the room. He didn't come all the way to the bed. He stopped in the middle of the room, which was, I thought, the right distance for what he was actually doing, which was assessing. How are you? I'm going to need surgery on my arm tomorrow, I said. Mild TBI, 6 sutures, I'll be here a few days. He nodded slowly. I'm glad you're okay. Were you? A pause. What? Were you glad when you were driving away? My mother made a small sound, not a word, just a sound. Owen looked at the window, then back at me. I called Mom and Dad. I came straight here. You didn't call an ambulance. I thought. A truck driver found me, Owen, 23 minutes after you left. The room was very quiet. Owen's jaw moved slightly. You weren't in danger. You were conscious. I could see that. I was conscious when you arrived. I don't know what I was for the 23 minutes after. Caleb. You took inventory, I said. I wasn't raising my voice. There was no reason to raise my voice. The room was small and the situation was clear and everything I was saying was already known by both of us. You looked at my arm. You looked at my head. You saw the blood. And you made a decision about what that information meant to you. That is not what happened. You also saw my badge. He went still. My mother looked between us. The hospital badge, I said. On the passenger seat, you saw it. I don't know what yours. Owen. I said his name the way you say someone's name when you want them to understand that the next thing you say is being said carefully and deliberately. I work here, in this building. I am an attending vascular surgeon at this hospital. I have been for 2 years. The people who work here know me. The nurses who came into this trauma bay know me. The emergency physician who treated me knows me. The orthopedic surgeon who's going to repair my arm tomorrow knows me. I am not a mystery here. He stared at me. When you walked into that waiting room tonight, I said, and told the desk staff you were the brother of the patient who just came in by ambulance and asked what was happening. The person you were talking to recognized my name. And the question they were deciding whether to ask you was the same one I am asking you now. His face had done several different things during this speech and had settled on something I couldn't entirely read. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was closer to the expression of a man who has walked into a room expecting to manage the furniture and discovered the furniture was watching him. "Why didn't you ever say?" he started. "Because saying it required you to ask," I said, "and you never asked." My mother sat back down. Owen stood in the middle of the room for a long moment. Then he said, slowly, "What does vascular surgery mean?" It was such an unexpected question, so plainly practical that I almost didn't know what to do with it. "Arteries and veins," I said. "Blood vessels, the structures that move blood through the body. When something goes wrong with them, an aneurysm, a blockage, a traumatic injury, a vascular surgeon repairs it." He absorbed this, and you do that. "Every day that I'm not lying in a hospital bed, yes." Another long silence. "I told people you worked at a clinic," he said. "I know." "I told Dad you probably," he stopped. "What did you tell Dad?" He looked at the window again. The rain was still going outside. The valley below was invisible in the dark and the weather. "I told him you were doing okay, but that you hadn't quite figured out where you fit yet," he said. "That you were good at what you did, but that medicine was a big field, and it took some people longer to find their place in it." I let that sit in the room. "How long have you been saying that?" I asked. "A while." "Years." He didn't answer, which was an answer. "Owen," my mother's voice was very quiet, not angry, just present. The voice she used when she was naming something she had been waiting a long time to name. He turned to her. "How did you know he hadn't figured out where he fit," she said, "if you never asked him where he was?" The question landed in the room like something placed on a table rather than thrown across one. It didn't require a raised voice. It didn't require anything except the specific patience of a woman who had watched her two sons inhabit the same family and arrive at completely different understandings of each other. Owen had no answer for it. He sat down in the chair near the door, not the one beside my bed. The one nearest the exit, which I noticed and did not say anything about. The surgery the following morning took 45 minutes. Dr. Fong did what she does, which is perform the required procedure with the efficiency and precision of someone who has done it enough times that the excellence is no longer effortful. It is simply present. When I woke in recovery, my arm was immobilized and correctly arranged, and my sternum was still registering its complaint, and my head felt as though it had been moderately reorganized, which it had. Priya came to check on me mid-morning, between her own cases. She stood at the foot of the bed the way doctors stand when they're making an assessment without making a fuss about it. "You look better than last night," she said. "That's a low bar." "It is," she looked at the arm. "Fong texted me, said it went well." "I know, she came by at 7. Priya sat down in the chair beside the bed, which was unusual for her. She was not, in the ordinary course of events, a person who sat during conversations that could be conducted standing. "Your brother was still here this morning," she said. "He stayed the night." I looked at her. "He slept in the waiting room," she said. "One of the overnight nurses saw him around 3 a.m. and offered him a pillow. He was still there at 6:30 when the day shift came in." I thought about that. "He asked one of the nurses what kind of doctor you were," Priya said. "She told him. She said he didn't say anything for about 15 seconds and then asked if you were good." "What did she say?" Priya smiled slightly. "She said you were one of the best in the department." I looked at the ceiling. The same ceiling tiles I had looked at in 100 other rooms in this building, during 100 other moments between one thing and the next. "What did he do?" I asked. "He sat back down," Priya said, "and then apparently he cried, which the nurse mentioned only because she said she'd never seen someone look so confused about why they were crying." Owen came to my room around noon. He had the look of a man who had been awake all night and had not resolved anything by being awake, only by surviving it. His jacket was creased. His hair was wrong. He sat in the chair beside the bed this time, not the one near the door. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "I should have called an ambulance." Yes. I panicked. I waited, not the way I should have panicked, he said. I didn't panic about you. I panicked about, he stopped. His hands were on his knees and they pressed slightly, the physical expression of an uncomfortable thought being held in place while the words caught up to it. I panicked about what it would mean, if you were badly hurt. I didn't want to, he stopped again. Owen. I didn't want to be the person standing next to something that bad, he said. I know how that sounds. It sounded honest, which was unusual enough to be worth something. You've been telling people I hadn't figured out where I fit, I said. Yes. Why? He looked at the window. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, and the valley was visible now, the kind of post-rain clarity that makes everything look freshly detailed, as if the world has been rinsed and set out to dry. Because you made me feel like you might be better at something than I was, he said. And I didn't know what that something was, so it was easier to decide it wasn't anything. I sat with that for a while. It was a more honest answer than I had expected, not an excuse, not a reframing, just the architecture of the decision laid out without decoration. You could have asked, I said. I know. I would have told you. I know that too. He looked at me then, not the assessing look from the doorway last night, something different. Would you have, though, actually? I thought about it honestly. Maybe not, I said. Not right away. You'd have made it into something it wasn't. Probably, he said. I would have compared it to something I'd done and come out on top. Yes. And you knew that. Yes. So you let me have the wrong story. You built the wrong story, I said. I just didn't correct it. He nodded slowly. That's the same thing from where I was standing. I considered that. He wasn't entirely wrong. Yes, I said. From where you were standing, it probably is. We sat there for a while without talking, which was something we had not been able to do without discomfort since we were children in our parents' car on long drives, when the agreement not to speak was practical rather than meaningful. This was meaningful. I'm going to be in here for 3 days, I said, maybe 4. I know. You don't need to stay. I'm going to stay, he said, not as a performance, not as a correction of last night, or not only that. He said it the way you say a simple fact about a decision you've already made and don't need to argue. All right, I said. He stayed. My father came on the 2nd day. He came alone in the mid-morning, and he sat in the chair beside the bed and looked at my arm, and then looked at me with the same inventory expression he had used in years of looking at me, except that something in the inventory had changed. There were different items on the list. He asked me about the surgery. Not in the polite, peripheral way he usually asked about medicine. He asked specifically what the fracture had looked like on imaging, what the repair had involved, how long recovery would take, whether I would be able to operate after 6 weeks or whether it was longer. I answered him carefully, not performing. Just answering, in the honest clinical way I talked about these things with colleagues, which was different from the careful and precise way I talked about them with people who hadn't asked before. He listened the way he had always listened to Owen's real estate deals, with his full attention, with his questions arriving in the right places. Afterward, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been a surgeon?" "Attending for 2 years," I said. "Residency and fellowship before that, about 12 years of training altogether. And before that, medical school, 4 years. So 16 years. Roughly." He processed this. "I knew you went to medical school." "Yes." "I didn't," he paused. "I didn't track the rest of it the way I should have." I didn't say anything. I let Owen's version of things be my version, he said. That was laziness on my part. It was the most direct thing my father had said to me in years, maybe ever. He was not a man who apologized often or fluently, but he was a man who could name a thing plainly when he had decided to, and the plainness of it was worth more to me than a more elaborately dressed version would have been. You could have asked, I said. I could have, he agreed. I should have. A pause. Owen told me what happened on the road, my father said. He told me himself. This morning, before he came back here. I looked at him. He didn't have to do that, my father said. I had the version he gave us on the night. He came back and told me the real one. I didn't know that. I hadn't known Owen had done that. Something in the room adjusted. How was that conversation? I asked. My father looked at the window. Hard, he said, for both of us. He paused. He's not a bad person, Caleb. I know he's not. He made a bad decision. Yes. There's a difference. I know, I said. I've been treating the difference between a bad decision and a bad person my whole career. I know what the difference looks like. My father nodded. He told me about the badge, he said, that he saw it. Yes. Did that affect what he decided? I thought about it. About the specific sequence of Owen's face. The look at my arm, the look at my head, the look at the badge, the walk back to his car. I think it made the decision easier to live with, I said. In the moment, if I was already connected to a hospital, maybe he thought someone else would handle it. Maybe that's what he told himself while he was driving. My father received this without defending Owen, which told me they had already talked about it in terms that didn't require defense. He needs to do better, my father said. He does. So do I. I looked at him. I could have asked, he said again simply. 16 years and I didn't ask, that's on me. We sat together for a while after that, not talking about the accident, not talking about Owen. Just sitting, which was something we hadn't done since I was young, before the dinner table became a venue for comparison, and the long drives became something other than what they had been. It wasn't resolved. Nothing was resolved in the span of a hospital room and 3 days, but it was begun. And beginning, when the gap is long enough, is its own kind of significant. I was discharged on the 4th day. My arm was in a splint. My head had been cleared. My sternum still ached when I breathed deeply, which the discharge nurse said would resolve in 2 to 3 weeks, and which I received with the private skepticism of someone who knew the timeline was optimistic, but appreciated the intention behind it. Priya walked me to the exit. "You're a bad patient," she said. "You kept asking about other patients' charts." I had questions. "You were sedated, Caleb." I had very small questions. She laughed. At the door she stopped and said, "Your brother was here every day." "I know. He helped your mom with parking on the 2nd day. She didn't know the validation situation, and he sorted it out." "That's a very Owen thing to do." "It is," she agreed. "He's good at logistics." I looked at the exit doors. "He's not bad," I said. "He made a bad call on a bad night." "He left you in the rain." "He did. And then he stayed for 4 days." "He did that too." She considered this. "What are you going to do with that?" I thought about it the way I thought about complicated clinical presentations. All available information. Both things true simultaneously. The man who drove away and the man who didn't leave again. "Work with it," I said, carefully. She nodded. That was, apparently, a sufficient answer. Marcus Webb, the truck driver who found me, sent a card to the hospital 3 weeks later addressed to the patient from Route 7. The nurses had kept it because they weren't sure it would reach me after discharge, and Priya handed it to me when I came back for a follow-up. He wrote that he hoped I was doing well. He wrote that he had 2 brothers himself and that he understood how families were complicated. He wrote that he stopped because stopping was the thing to do and that he hadn't thought about it much beyond that. I wrote him back. I told him what stopping had meant. I told him I was a surgeon and that I understood, from the other side of the work, exactly how much those 23 minutes had mattered, and that his decision to stop was the decision I wanted to tell him about, separately from everything else that happened that night. I also told him that if he was ever in Clearwater and needed anything, he could leave a message for me at the hospital and someone would find me. He never called. But I think he knew the offer was there, and I think that was the point of making it. Owen and I had dinner 2 months later. Just the two of us, at a restaurant neither of us had been to before, which felt like the right choice, no history embedded in the furniture, no associations to navigate. He ordered something I didn't expect him to order. He didn't talk about real estate for the first 20 minutes. He asked me questions. Real ones, with the specific shape of someone who has been thinking about what they should have asked years ago and is trying to cover ground without making the catching up feel like performance. He asked what vascular surgery meant on a day-to-day basis. He asked what the hardest case I'd had that year was, and I told him about a repair on a patient with a ruptured aortic aneurysm at 2 a.m. in October and what the margin for error in that procedure looked like. He listened without interrupting. He didn't offer a comparison. At some point he said, "I don't actually know what I thought you were doing." "I know. I think I thought, it doesn't matter what I thought." "It matters," I said. "But you don't have to say it tonight." He looked at his glass. "I built a story because it was easier than not knowing. I told it to people because it felt like information when it was actually just filling the space." "Yes." And then the space turned out to have a lot in it. "It did." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry I left you on the road," he said. "I'm going to be sorry about that for a long time." "Probably," I said. "I'm also sorry for the years before the road." I looked at him. "The story I was telling," he said. "The way I talked about you, that was its own thing, and I need to fix it." "How?" "By telling the right one," he said, "to the same people." I sat with that. It was not a small offer. Owen valued nothing more than the coherence of the narrative he presented to people. Correcting the story meant admitting the story had been wrong, which meant admitting he had been wrong in public to the specific people he had been performing for. "You don't have to do that dramatically," I said. "I'm not going to do it dramatically," he said. "I'm just going to tell people what you do, when it comes up, the way I should have been telling them." "All right. Is that enough?" It was the same question Marcus had asked in my last script. It was, apparently, the question that brothers arrived at when they had finally stopped performing long enough to ask something real. "It's a start," I said. He nodded. We finished dinner. He paid, which I let him do because some gestures are more useful than others, and this one cost him very little and meant something about the direction things were moving. Outside, the night was clear and cold in the way of early December. He walked to his car and I walked to mine, and at the point where the parking lot separated us, he stopped and turned. "Caleb." I turned. "What you do," he said. "Inside people, the arteries, the blood, the thing that keeps them going." I waited. "I'm glad you do that," he said. "I'm glad someone like you does that." He didn't make it about me being his brother. He just said it as a plain fact about the world, which was the cleanest version of a thing he could have said, and the one that landed the way it was meant to. "Go home, Owen," I said. He went. I stood in the parking lot for a while afterward, in the cold and the quiet, with my arm still in its final weeks of recovery, and my chest no longer hurting when I breathed, and the particular kind of tiredness that comes at the end of something long, when the effort has finally been spent, and whatever it produced is just beginning to be visible. I thought about the road, about the guardrail and the rain and the 23 minutes, about the ceiling lights of the trauma bay and Priya's voice and Dr. Fong's hands and the nurses who knew my name. I thought about Marcus Webb sleeping in the cab of his truck somewhere out on the highway, not knowing he was in anyone's story. I thought about what my mother had said. How did you know he hadn't figured out where he fit if you never asked him where he was? And then I got in my car and drove home, carefully in the December dark, on roads I knew. So let me ask you this. If the person who underestimated you for years finally had to face what you had actually built, would you want them to see it under those circumstances? Or would you have wanted to show them on your own terms before the world arranged the reveal for you? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the most important thing isn't the moment of recognition. It's what you both decide to do after it.